Here we go. All right, so we are now being recorded. Wanted everybody in the room to know that. Tonight's workshop is on resumes and portfolios. And I'm really excited to run through these slides with you because I think that those are pieces that can really trip people up. What you noticed in the side chat here is that there was a request that you use your full name. And we've determined that there are 2 ways to use your full name in Zoom, or to change your full name in Zoom. So let me see if it'll let me get meta here. It will let me get meta here. Share screen. Now you can see my screen, hopefully, and so you can see I'm logged in as the LC moderator, and there's a drop-down box here, and I can click my profile. Now it's going to open it in Safari. But you go into my profile, and then this is where you have the opportunity to make those changes. You can set your picture, those sorts of things. So that will be your way to do that. Let's stop sharing for a second here. And then the other thing that was suggested that it doesn't look like the software will let me show you is that if you go over to the list of participants in this meeting and you float your mouse over your name, there's a More button. I can see somebody's finger. This is great. There is a More button, and you can click on the More down arrow, and there is a feature in there that says rename, and I believe you can change your own name there. So we will be using your names on Zoom in order to take attendance for all of these online webinars. So that is true whether we are partially in person and partially online or not. So great, looks like people are having success with that. If that doesn't work for you tonight, hit us up offline and we will figure out a way to make that happen. But in the meantime, I'd love to go ahead and get started with some of the content. Let me flip over to my slides here. We're gonna talk tonight about resumes and or portfolios. And I think that what is really critical about this topic is that it is so fraught for people in terms of what do I do? How do I do it for tech? How does this work? Because there are so many variables. And I think it's really critical that you hear a little bit of opportunity to improve your skills with your resume, as well as your opportunity to really tailor your materials for every job that you apply for. So if I do this, Ben Shutt, you should be on the line right now. If I do this, I cannot see the chat feature, but can you guys see the slides that says resume and portfolio development? Can somebody give me an audio yes?
Yeah, I can hear it. I see it.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm flying blind here. So in other words, if you have a question, you are going to have to chime in. But this is the best way for you to see the slides in the most quality format. So first things first, I just want to hear from 1 or 2 people, what is a resume? How do you describe it? And what is its purpose?
A resume is something on a sheet of paper or more, usually just 1 sheet of paper, lets an employer know what you can do. Awesome. What you have done.
Cool, and who was that? What's your name?
Rick.
Rick, awesome. Rick says it tells an employer what you can do. How about somebody else? What was the purpose of a resume?
So a resume basically tells an employer what training you've had, what it's what training you have had, and like Rick said, what you've done in terms of projects, in terms of previous jobs, what skills you have, just stuff like that.
Awesome. And what was your name?
Logan.
Hi, Logan. So that's another great descriptor. I like to think of your resume as your first impression. It is your first opportunity to get in front of somebody and to show them who you are. So it serves as a paper or digital paper introduction for you. When I do introductions between people, whether that's in my personal life or my professional life, I like to write a little paragraph like, this is my colleague, Ben. He is an expert at curriculum design and coaching people on successfully navigating their technical initial interviews. And then whoever I'm introducing them to, I would say, this is my colleague, David. David is outstanding at business development and marketing materials. And I would say, great, here's the topic that I thought the two of you would want to talk about. And then I say something like, I'll let you guys take it from here. So I always provide that warm introduction. And so your resume should serve as a warm and specific introduction of you to whomever or whatever job you are applying for. So I think that's really critical. And really what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of content and structure and that sort of thing, that's what it all comes down to, is what's the best way to make that first impression and get your foot in the door. So it provides a summary of your skills and accomplishments. It's an advertisement. It's a snapshot. And that's the other thing, is that everybody knows it's a snapshot. So it doesn't have to be fully exhaustive. It has to put the best, it's not even the best, it has to put the most critical portions of you and your experience out there for folks. It is not an autobiography, which means that we all have to resist the urge to include everything you've ever learned or accomplished, which is hard. That can be hard for a lot of us because we're really proud of the things that we've done, myself included. I hate deleting stuff from my resume. It drives me bonkers, but it's the reality, is that you'll get to talk about those other things later if your resume speaks well for you. So I think that that's really critical. At this point in most of your careers, in terms of being job seekers, probably career changers, probably not already having a lot of job experience in technology, at LaunchCode, we really believe that there are these 5 sections that you need, but these are really the only ones that you do need. Now, if you're one of our folks who was in tech a while ago and then took time off for a number of reasons and is coming back, you could argue with me that you might have a couple other sections on top of that, and I'm totally willing to go with it. But for those of you who are in the bulk of folks who come and work with us at LaunchCode, you need your contact information. You need to clearly list your technical skills. You need to clearly identify key projects that you've worked on, including descriptions. We'll get into that. You need to define where your education has come from up until this point. And you need to address any professional experience that you have, relevant or seemingly irrelevant. Both of those are important, and we'll get to that. And what we will do is that tomorrow morning we will send out the slides from this experience, as well as another little quick handout that we have. So you'll get those from Ben in the next 24 hours. So take notes tonight, do that sort of thing, but also don't worry about capturing absolutely every last detail. So what we're going to do first is we're going to go through all of these sections as to what they are, and then we are going to spend some time talking about how you can really make your resume polished and stand out. And then we will do Q&A. Somewhere in there, my fabulous little Fitbit watch gadget here is going to tell me that we all need to stand up and stretch our legs. And so I am going to make sure that at roughly 6:50, we all pause, get a glass of water, stretch our legs. I know that even last Tuesday, just listening to 2 hours of content, I was like, I need to stretch. I got up and got a snack while the panel was going on. So I want to make space for that for all of us today. So we will take a little break, probably around 6:50 when my watch buzzes. And then we'll go from there. So, and if somebody is shuffling papers right now, if you could hit your mute button, that would be great. Awesome. So personal information, keep it clean, keep it simple, and keep it professional. And so if you are using kind of like, I don't know, what do you call it? I want to call them code names, you know, like I have certain names that I use on social media. If you're using those, you best be able to explain what they are and how they're relevant to you, and make sure that they're cleaned up and professionally polished. So for me, one of the sillier ones I use is Drive By Lava. I'm 100% stand behind that. That is my roller derby name. It is my other alter ego. So I have no problem with that being my Twitter handle. And I'm able to explain that, and I am comfortable looking somebody in the eye and doing that. But if that's not the case for you, I would suggest finding some new handles, changing some email addresses, and sort of thing, making sure that it's polished and professional. It is really critical that you don't include those other locations unless you are prepared for employers to take that into consideration while making a decision about you. So if you go to my Twitter account, you're going to find a few pictures of my dog. You are going to find a lot of things about social justice. You are going to find a lot of things about hiring practices in the tech industry. You're going to find a lot of things that all circle around my professional experience with a little bit of personal flavor thrown in. Versus I keep my Facebook locked down tight and private. I don't list that on my resume, and that's where you're going to find me, talking about the elimination diet that I'm doing right now, or like whatever else that I'm doing, right? So be mindful of that. It is not that employers don't want to honor the whole you, but when you are job searching, you want them to be able to get to the most critical things first. They'll tune out if there's too much data, so help them focus in on the things that are most critical. So I think this is a great basic header up at the top where it says LaunchCode. It would say your name, and you would be able to link in all of your information. I think that's a really clean, polished way to do that.
I've also been told not to include the actual address before for identity theft purposes, and also because some employers have been known to just discriminate against people for being in the wrong areas.
Yeah, and who is that who just spoke?
Mark.
Hi, Mark. Yeah, so I think that's a good point to make, particularly if you're going to post your resume out into the internet ether. So if you're going to use websites like monster.com or maybe Dice is pretty reputable, but some of those other ones that will openly distribute your information, I do think it can be good to redact your address for theft purposes. I've also known a number of job seekers to get a Google phone number, put that on their resume because they want to be able to turn that phone number off later on once they've got a job. If you do that, you best be sure that it works because recruiters don't call multiple times if your phone number is not working. So that's a good tip. You are correct in that there is some question out there about some unconscious bias about seeing addresses or neighborhoods, that sort of thing. I would recommend including your city at least so that people know that you are local to the job you are applying to. In some circumstances, that is an unconscious bias to not interview people from another city. In some cases, it's a logistical thing. They know that they don't have time for a person to relocate. They know that they're not offering a relocation package, that sort of thing. So sometimes it's legitimate, sometimes it's not. So as long as you're applying for things in your city, do make sure that you at least have your city and state listed on there. I think you can go either way on that, honestly. Does that address that for you?
Yes, thank you.
Cool, awesome. Technical skills. Big thing here is going back to that idea, this is not an autobiography. Only list the things that you can talk about. If you touched it one afternoon watching a couple of YouTube videos, you're probably not ready to answer technical questions about it, and you're probably not ready to talk about it in an interview. So I implore you not to do the laundry list, but rather to do the things that you feel like you could answer questions about, or you could point to an example of a project or something that you built. So we also at LaunchCode encourage folks to split it into categories so that it's not just taking up your entire resume of all of these words that are just there to be like letter soup. And that's what I like about this example on the screen right now is that the languages are in one line, one or two lines, the tools, the operating systems. If that was a longer list, it might take up a couple lines, but it's still, at least it's categorized. And what that does is that helps employers quickly find the information that they need. If they know that MongoDB is critical, they're going to go down to tools, they're going to find MongoDB, they're going to go check, okay, I also need, and then they're going to go look for that information. And so help them screen that piece of paper to find the information that they most want as quickly as possible. And that will keep you moving forward in the process. It'll make you an easy yes. And everybody likes to have an easy, confident, oh yeah, great, I want to talk to that person. That's kind of the ideal. List your skills as they relate to the job for which you are applying in order from strongest to weakest. And so I think that that's a good key here is that if your strongest skill is Java, keep that first. if you're looking at a job application and it says nothing about Java, but you have 3 of the other technologies and you're like, well, I'm not as good at those as I am Java, but I'm pretty good at them. Move those up to the front. Again, make it easy for them to scan your resume and find exactly what they're looking for. Cool. Any questions on skills in the skills section of your resume? Okay.
I got a question.
Yeah, who is that?
This is Rick.
Hi, Rick.
All right. So I have 10 years of mainframe experience. Okay. Now, if I'm applying for a web job, would I list my mainframe skills or not?
We would want to get creative about your resume and make sure that it acknowledges and honors your mainframe experience, because that is something employers would like to see, a technology history. But what I wouldn't want is for it to take up too much of the, I always think of it as the real estate on the page. I wouldn't want it to take up too much of the real estate. So how I would talk with you about transferable skills, relevant skills, job experiences. So we're going to get to the section on job experience, and it may be that that's where it ends up getting highlighted, right? Is in the job experience, but maybe not in the technical skills. Also, this speaks to, and this is a great question, I'm glad you asked it, oh, I just noticed there's a typo on this slide. I'm going to come back to that. One of the things that I appreciated about that question is that idea of being able to tailor your resume to every job. Now, I am not a technical person, but when I apply for different types of jobs, I actually at one point had about 3 different types of resumes that I was using for different jobs. And they were all roughly the same. Like at first glance, if I just opened the PDF on my computer, I really had to read to figure out like which one was which, because I couldn't tell. So you may actually end up having one that, you know, for jobs that you feel like really like they're going to dig the fact that you have mainframe experience. And then you have another resume for jobs where you really don't think they're going to care and might even be turned off by the history that you have, right? So you might actually end up developing that in multiple modules. Is that something that you've worked on yet?
What I've kind of done is if I'm going for a mainframe job, I'll put down all my mainframe stuff. And if I'm not going for a mainframe job, I'll just shorten it to like COBOL and DB2 just to show, hey, I said I've worked in mainframe for 10 years and here's something that I actually have done without, like you say, taking up too much real estate.
Cool. Yeah, I think you're on the right track. I'd love to either Ben or Lisa or David or I for us to sit down and look at that, but I think you're on the right track. That's what I would recommend. And as I was saying that, I noticed that this slide actually has a typo. It has a period on 2 lines and not on the 3rd. That's one of my pet peeves. Always check your punctuation at the end. It doesn't really matter which way you do it. Just do it the same way all the time. So cool. Any other questions on your technical skills section?
Yeah, I had a quick question.
Yeah, who is this?
This is Matt.
Hi, Matt.
You kind of addressed this. You talked about the technical skills listing your strongest first, going down to maybe the ones you're less familiar with. Is that going to be recognized that that's the order? I've gotten advice that was more like, you know, list years of experience, for example, because everybody in the tech industry knows that you're going to, you know, maybe you have more experience with Java, but you also know some JavaScript, and, you know, nobody's expecting you to be an expert in everything. But what's the best way to communicate that on a resume that, you know, these are your stronger ones and these are your not as strong ones?
A lot of that will come through in the job descriptions or the work experience and the education experience that you listed. That's where a lot of that will come through. Now, if you are somebody who has 15 years of technical experience in a variety of maybe more niche companies, like that sort of thing, you might end up writing the style of resume that actually says, like, I have 12 years of .NET experience, and I have 5 years of this, and I have 6 years. You might actually end up listing that out, but that would be typically for somebody much more advanced. And I see that a lot on LinkedIn profiles, which is a whole nother workshop, but I do commonly see that on LinkedIn profiles. What I would recommend, I mean, you know, your first question was, is that how it's recognized? Probably not. I don't think most hiring managers sit down and go, oh, well, this person's profile, they must be most comfortable with MySQL. I don't think they're doing that. For me, it's about readability and helping them find that information. If you feel like like I'm trying to think of a good example here. If you feel like you're somebody who you had, maybe you had a support job at another large company where you actually did do a lot of script writing, let's say. And so you've got a whole bunch of years of writing scripts to solve problems for this, support line. And now you're trying to pivot into a development job. Like, we would probably find a way to highlight that in, I would think, the work experience category. So underneath that, I would make sure that those bullet points from that job highlighted how much code you were writing in order to be successful at that job. I'm less likely to make a laundry list. I wouldn't recommend saying like 2 years this, 3 years that, but really kind of weaving it into the general narrative of your resume. And there might be, there's other recruiters who might disagree with that. That might be a matter of opinion. But that's kind of where my gut goes on it.
I'll chip in on one more thing if I can.
Mm-hmm.
This is Rick again. So when I was at Oregon Tech, I took as an elective a Android class in the summer. And I got into it, one class, never touched it again. And I don't feel like I would be able to do it in a job without a whole lot of, practice and work. So I would just leave it off my resume.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, in my professional experience, and I think this is different, well, I'm not even going to go there because I don't think that's relevant to tech. For me, what I've done is I've kind of tried to lump it together. Like, here's all of the diversity and inclusion education certifications I've received, and I'll put those all together, right? That sort of thing. But, if we're talking about how many years and how many this and that sort of thing, it really is about showing a valuable narrative because that's what they're looking for. And a lot of times as junior level talent, you're trying to demonstrate that you know enough that you can learn more. That's a lot of what and you'll hear us say that a lot throughout the Liftoff All In program. We're going to talk about, like, you need to be able to demonstrate how you learn because you're never done learning. There's no one language that is the best at this point of the game. It's learning them and then learning how you learn so that when something else pops up, you'll be able to build off of that and build into the next thing. And I know it sounds hokey, but a lot of this is like, follow your passion, do the stuff that's fun and enjoy it, because that's going to lead you to another thing that you enjoy. And that's going to lead you to another thing that you enjoy. And I think that there are rabbit holes you can go down of technologies that don't have a ton of applicability, and we'll have fewer jobs out there, but there isn't like one secret sauce. And in fact, what we found is that, like, as different training programs focus on, what's the hot language, then a couple of years later, the market is flooded with candidates with that experience. And then there's no jobs because everybody's competing for the same job. So it is about keeping kind of a diverse portfolio of skills and languages and tools for yourself. And then being able to market those in an appealing manner and be able to demonstrate that you understand what's disparate and what's related in your search and in the jobs that you would hold.
I have a question about, so at what point should you mentioned not something that you like, that you spent an hour with, and then Rick mentioned, taking a summer class. At what point can I include it? Is, 4 years of college enough? Is 4 years of college with 0 work experience not enough? I mean, what?
I would say that you should have, if I were to ask you a technical question about that language or that tool, could you answer off the top of your head or with a quick Google search basic information about how to utilize those tools, those libraries, those languages, whatever it might be? That's my biggest thing, is can you talk about it? And can you talk about it without stuttering and stammering? I mean, we all stutter and stammer a little bit in interviews, but without the oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Literally had a candidate on Monday, called him after his interview, said, how'd it go? He goes, man, I know SQL, and I bombed these 2 like rudimentary questions, and I should have known it off the top of my head, and I couldn't come up with it. Sure enough, the hiring manager sent me the feedback today, and he said, well, it was a really great interview, but he missed these 2 really basic questions. And I was like, well, I mean, the good news is he knew it, and he knew that he should have been able to answer it more clearly and more confidently. So I think that's really the thing. It's not a measurable, like, do this and check this box. It really is like can you talk about it, and can you go in there and build more knowledge on the framework of that understanding that you have?
Yeah, this is Rick here. I would answer that question like this, since I have a lot of experience. I think if you spent 9 months on it, then I think you can put it down. But if you only spent like 3 months on it and then you haven't seen it in a while and it's been a couple of years, then no. But if you've spent, 9 months seems to be about, if you spent 9 months on it, then you know it well enough that you can, you might have to go back and do a little review, but you have that into your head at about that point. That'd be my mark if I had to make a mark.
Yeah, I think what I've seen is that it's more quality over quantity. That it's not easy to measure what that 9 months looks like or what that 3 months looks like. So that's why I stay away from numbers, is because that experience is going to look very different for every person. So yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I also think that can vary a lot from circumstance to circumstance. So for the sake of time, I'm going to keep us moving forward off of the skills. I'm here. We can always take more questions offline or at the end of the session. So projects and your online portfolio. We have found that in the Seattle and Portland markets, this has been incredibly critical, to be able to demonstrate what you've learned through something that you've actually built, and that becomes really important. So as you're doing this, my favorite structure for including it on your resume is to name the project with something conceivable, right? Not just, ABC project, but just something that describes what it does. A link to where someone could look at either the end product or the code, depending on what the project is. And then a 1 to 2 sentence description of what the project does and or what technologies it utilizes. And the idea behind this is that you can provide that link to your GitHub account, but you want to make it so that the employer is enticed to click on that link, that they go, oh, I'd like to learn more about that, and they move forward with it. So I don't want you to lie. I don't want you to make anything up, but just describe it accurately. We do recommend roughly 3 of those on your resume, which is part of why I think Liftoff is a great program, because you're going to build one very substantial one over the next 8 weeks. And you want to avoid those student assignments. We talked a little bit about this in the job search strategy workshop on Monday. Staying away from, so when class assignments are designed, and I think this is true regardless of what your training program is that they're designed to be kind of like little building blocks of information. And so we want you to go out, we want you to accomplish this task, and then to learn that task, you're going to do this thing over here. Great, you've got that. Then we're going to go over and we're going to learn this other chunk over here. And then it's in most cases, hopefully the curriculum will loop those chunks back together, and you'll have something that shows how you can utilize all those pieces. But typically the individual assignments themselves are not really that impressive. And you're also accomplishing a task that somebody already knew there was an answer to, and predicted what the answer should or could be. So projects are your opportunity to be able to demonstrate how you've synthesized that material. If you think about doing like woodworking or building a table, for example, like in a class, and I was a technical theater major, we literally had a quiz on how to use the saw and how to cut an angle that was accurate and how to cut complex angles on a specific saw, those sorts of things, right? We would have a quiz on that. That's not really impressive for me to walk into an employer and be like, look, I cut this piece of wood at 3 different angles. Isn't it awesome? What's impressive is that when I use all of those angles and I use a bunch of other skills that I've learned and I build a table. And then what's even more impressive is when I build a pretty table, an attractive, useful table, right? And so if you can think of your projects with that same sort of layering, that can really help you be a little bit more competitive. And that's, at the end of the day, that's what so many of our professional workshops at LaunchCode are about, is about just making sure that you stand the best chance possible with the level of experience you have. We're not trying to make it so that you're competing with people with 5 and 8 years experience. We want to make it so that you stand out amongst that tier of candidates and that you land the job. So that's really the aim. let's see, what else have we have here? Keep an online code repository specifically with prospective employers in mind, especially for those of you coming into Liftoff All In. Make sure that your GitHub accounts or whatever code repository you're using are cleaned up, that they look nice. Keep a professional profile picture. I really encourage you to use a picture of you. I know there are certain circumstances in which that feels unsafe or not okay, and I'm willing to respect that. But stray away from something super wacky in that circumstance too. For example, my partner is an engineer. He has gorillas as all of his professional profile pictures. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, like that's terrible. No one knows you're you. You have the most generic name. Like, how does this work? But he's been an engineer for 25 years. He can do that if he wants to, right? He's got a professional reputation. He's got his networks in place. It's fine. But if his name is Ben Ford. If I'm looking for Ben Ford online and I'm trying to figure out, there's literally another software engineer in Vancouver named Ben Ford. If I go to GitHub and I'm trying to, as a recruiter, and I'm trying to make sure I'm looking at the right GitHub account for Ben Ford, well, I can't really tell because one's got a gorilla and one's got a dog, and now I don't know. So do what you can to make that easy for them to confirm that. Yeah, I'll say that. And there's about 800 reasons you could argue with me that would be legitimate as to why to make your profile picture not literally a picture of you. And I'm open to all of those 9,700 reasons also. So I talked about hosting your site. And if you are a web developer or front-end developer, you definitely need to have a website portfolio, and it definitely needs to look attractive. That's a non-negotiable. So make sure that you're doing that as you are moving forward. Yes, we talked about removing the beginning stuff like your Hello World projects or your very introductory school assignments. You're going to want to remove those. This slide is just talking about that. READMEs. READMEs are huge for engineering managers who are taking the time to get to know their candidates. So this is assuming that you've gotten to the point that the engineering manager is bought in from your resume or from a phone interview, or that somebody, maybe you were doing really great at those informational interviews and networking, and somebody went to a manager at their company and said, you know, I met this person at a meetup the other day, and like, I really think they got some fire in their belly, and I really like talking with them. I think they might be good for our team. Will you take a look at their GitHub account or whatever their repository is? Assuming that you get that far, you want to make sure that your READMEs demonstrate good documentation skills. And this is particularly important if you have projects that can't be hosted live. So be keeping that in mind as you build things. What should you be taking screenshots of? What should you be writing good descriptions of? I would say that even I, as a layperson, ought to be able to open up your README and be able to tell what the project is about and what it is supposed to do. Minimally. If you're building a more complex project, you might also have READMEs that talk a little bit about why you chose the approach that you chose, or why you chose the language that you chose, or whatever it might be. You might also include documentation in that regard. And we do have a workshop on documentation skills, and we'll get to that later in the program. But I think knowing that that is a good thing to be including in your portfolio and repository is a good practice to start establishing right now. And here is a great example of what I was talking about before, of being able to very succinctly on your one-page resume highlight a few key projects. And so this is a good example. I wish I had a pointer right now. Oh, maybe I do. Maybe you can see that. So we've got inventory manager. Oh, this tool manages some sort of inventory. Great. Here's where I could go to find that. Awesome. And then just this one sentence here. This is, oh, use this, use that. Okay, awesome. And then specifically tells me what tools you used. Now, this is really great because you're going to have a technical skills section up at the top that lists your technical skills. Then down here, I'm going to be able to tell as a hiring manager, oh, this is where they used that, or this is where they built that skill. Plus, when we talk about applicant tracking systems here in a little bit, this is also where you can start to build that redundancy that says like, oh, this person has a lot of Java on their resume versus this person mentions Java one time, or whatever skill set you're trying to feature. So I really like this slide in terms of presenting that. And you can see like one is like inventory manager, pretty generic, but tells me what it does. Where's my boot? What is that? Right, so it can be a little bit of character and a little bit of color, but it's still related to what you're doing. pole paradise. It's funny. Cool. Yeah. And as much as you can, make sure that those descriptions match the job that you're actually applying for. So if you've got, hopefully you've got a whole bunch of projects, and as you apply for different types of jobs or different types of roles, you might feature those differently. Especially say you're applying for a company that is their end product is somehow related to a project that you did, then you can go into the interview saying like, oh, I've really always been into video technologies. I think that's really interesting. It's obviously nowhere near the caliber of the software that you all are producing, but here is a project that I did related to your end product. And it starts a different kind of conversation. And employers also like to know that you have a genuine interest in what they're doing. Like, yeah, we all need jobs. We all have bills. We all need to eat. Like, yeah, everybody needs a job. So why should they want you to be at their company? And they want to know that you're interested and you're curious, and you're more likely to stick around if you're interested in technology. So if you have that authentic match, play it up. Absolutely. Again, don't lie. But if you've got an authentic match, let's make sure that that gets featured in a way that they can know you are genuinely passionate about what they are building. And action verbs, that's the other thing on this slide. And we're going to come back around and talk some more about action verbs. Cool. I'm going to pause there. That was a big chunk of talking. Sorry, y'all. What questions do you have on projects and portfolios right now?
So I have a question on projects and portfolio.
Yeah, who's this?
This is Jim.
Hi.
Hi, Carrie. So yeah, what I wanted to know was, I know a lot of the times you're supposed to use metrics or numbers to kind of stand out in your projects. Like, for example, you have implement a relational database for inventory storage. Should you then build onto that to say, I implemented a relational database which reduced the size of the database by 25% or something like that?
I think that can be valuable. I tend to emphasize that in your job descriptions. That kind of like metrics-based accomplishment naming. It could be done. If that was true in this circumstance, then I would include that. I think what I'm struggling with is like, compared to what? If this is your own personal project, compared to what? Like if you're on a job and you can say that you were on the team that determined, that figured out a way to reduce that by 25%. It's a super easy talking point. And then you also have a story to tell. But if you put that on there, it should have some sort of narrative that goes with it, right? Like implemented a relational database for inventory storage, revamped it partway through. That feels like clunky language. Like how do you include that as part of a narrative? So I do think you're right. I think as much factual information as you can give, I would. More likely, I think you would use that sort of talking point in an interview. So I would take note of those experiences, because it's easy for on a phone interview for me, especially as a recruiter doing potentially like an HR phone screen, right? And say, tell me about a project that you're most passionate about, or tell me about one of the projects on your resume that was really interesting for you to work on. And that would be part of the story you would tell, is that, I started building it one way and I got partway through and I realized that, this was a project that I was just working on for me. But if this was a company and this were to try to scale, that would not be cost efficient for us to scale in the manner that I was building this. So then I did some research, compared some features, decided to build it this way, and that saved me 25%, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's a great story to tell. If you can find a way to succinctly put that on your resume, awesome. Then do it. But if not, save it for the other examples where you're going to talk about those experiences in an interview.
So more for the interview than it is on your resume.
Yeah, I think it's just easier to do it that way. But if you can fit it into, a short bullet, like these bullets here are about the width of your page, maybe it might tip over into a second line. If you can succinctly tell that there, yeah, it would be great to include that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions on the last handful of slides?
Hello, I'm Stacy.
Hi, Stacey.
I had this has popped up multiple times. I have all my projects were in class, but they were big projects. Like I helped build a website that people are actually using. I've done all these really cool projects, but I don't list that they're school projects or, that it was always a part of a school or a course that I've done. And every time it comes up in a discussion, they say, oh, you've done this on your own, but I have to kind of backtrack them and say, well, to be honest, they were a part of a class that I took, but I did do this project, or this was utilized in the end, by a customer. On my resume, should I put that this was a part of a class, or can I just leave that out? Because it always needs to be a clarifying point in an interview where, the interviewers will go, oh, that was part of a class. So that's always been the bit. Should I list that they were part of the class or not?
Like there's this, I feel like, why did that come up? Like that's my gut instinct is like, why did somebody feel the need to nitpick that? So I think that's really interesting. People do interesting things in interview processes. I'm not going to lie about that. I don't think you're being like unethical by not listing it. I think you're okay too. I think that there are more and less confident ways to present that material. And so like if you were to put it on your resume, you might choose to say, put a bullet point about group project, like, I don't know how I'd say it succinctly, but something along the lines of like real life client real life client opportunity as presented to us as a part of such and such course. And so, because if you built a website that people are actually using, you built a real thing. And I think that is worth noting. I think it's impressive. I think it demonstrates a lot of other skills. The other thing is that if you have group project experience, please, please, please note that. Note that it was a group project. On the one hand, some people feel like, oh, but then they're not going to think I didn't do enough of it. It's not going to look as impressive. But what they're going to be impressed by is the fact that you've probably used a ticketing system. You've probably forked some code. You've probably had to like disagree with somebody else about how to build something. Those are all real life things that happen in the work environment. So if it was a group project, I would note that it's a group project. If it was a real client, I would note that it's a real client. Yeah, we can talk offline. I'm wondering if there's like something specific about those projects that you listed that is causing people to ask, or maybe there's something in the storytelling. Because I don't think that you have to like apologize for that. I think you can say like, yeah, that was a part of a class and we happened to build a real life website that's actually
the automatic assumption is that I did it separate from anything. Like this was like, oh, I see you've done some consulting work on your own. But then I have to backtrack them and say, no, this was part of a coursework every time. I think it's maybe in the way I'm phrasing the projects. I'm not sure. But
yeah, let's take a deeper look at that because that does seem interesting. Typically when people do consulting work, the way I've seen it at least is that they'll say like, name of their business, and then they'll list a few key projects under that. And so I would be surprised that if you were presenting it like, if you're presenting it like this, I think that makes it clear that it's a personal project. Yeah, let's take a look at your resume and see what we can figure out. See if there's something there that's triggering that question. Because that surprises me, but who knows?
Yeah, Rick here. I want to say that when I've gone on my interviews, as far as talking about projects, if I was paid as an employee, I get 100% credit from the interviewer. If I did it as a volunteer internship for a real company, I get half credit. And anything that I did as far as school or group or educational, I get 0 credit for the project, but I get some credit for having some familiarity with the technology. That's been my experience.
Okay. So it's making sure that you're building things on your own and or finding real life clients. I think that's harder to do. There's a whole other business acumen piece that goes with that. So that's good feedback from both of you. I'll have to noodle on that a little bit more because it's not something that I've run across before.
I have a question.
Yeah, who's this?
This is Logan.
Okay.
So I noticed you have dates on here next to your projects. I have been told that we shouldn't include dates unless they're recent. And that goes for projects and job experience.
I think, again, that's circumstantial and based on what your profile looks like in kind of terms of what your work experience is. And we're going to talk about work experience, but like gaps there, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's really critical to include dates to explain an employment gap. And you want to make sure that it's like really clear on your resume that like, yeah, I was out of work for X number of months, but look at all the stuff I built in that time. So I think it can go both ways. I don't think it's a hard and fast rule in either direction.
All right, thanks.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'll throw another one out there, Carrie.
Yeah.
So the projects that you list on your resume, is that going to be the same as what you list in your online portfolio, or should you try to make the online portfolio stand out more than your resume?
My hope would be is that you have other things to show and that what the description is in your resume is enticing employers to want to go look at your portfolio.
Okay, that makes sense.
And especially depending on what else you have to put on your resume, like you might just run out of room, right? Like sometimes we just have to make decisions because there's no more space on the page. And so you start picking and choosing, like what's the most impressive thing or what's the most relevant thing, and how do I put that together for this particular job in terms of what I think they want to know about me. And so you move forward the best way that you can. And put the stuff that you think is going to most likely get them to click on that link and go to your repository or your web page or whatever you've got.
But your portfolio and resume should match with your projects and project descriptions. You should not leave one off or talk about this one even though it's not on your portfolio, or does that matter?
Sorry, maybe I'm not understanding the question. So in my opinion, you would have a bunch of stuff in your portfolio and you would highlight a couple of those on your resume.
Oh, so my question was, would the projects that you have on your resume be also listed on your portfolio so they kind of mesh with each other and there's no conflict? You know, well, how come you didn't list this project on your portfolio, or so on?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because in a lot of circumstances, your portfolio actually is going to be like your GitHub repository or your Heroku or whatever else it is. So you want to, anything that's on your resume should be easily found. And if that means that like, if we go back and we look at this slide, like 3 of these, and in Lisa's example that she built for these slides, they're all GitHub links. But like, let's say that like, Where's My Boot was actually a website. And the link you wanted to put there was the website that people would go to find that. That's fine, and let's say that your GitHub was like your primary portfolio, but it was listed, this other thing was hosted on a website. Like, I don't know, it might be nice to include a README that says like other projects that are hosted on the web and include that. Like maybe that's what you do. But I don't think it has to be exhaustive or that everything has to be in one place, but you do want it to be easily navigable. And if you're going to list it on your project or list it on your resume, make sure that they can find it, that they can see it someplace.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry that I misunderstood your question the first time.
Hey, I had a question. What about when you have just a ton of stuff on your GitHub? Because maybe you're working on some projects, they're not necessarily portfolio projects, but you've created repos for them. How do you manage that? What are some strategies that you've seen work for people?
What I've seen is labeling things in progress. Is the biggest thing. And I mean, the other thing is they can see when you committed code. Like if you committed code at 11 o'clock last night, they're like, oh, you're playing with this, you're working on it, that sort of thing. And then this is where my personal experience using GitHub varies a little bit, but my understanding is that on a screen like this, so you've got your popular repositories. So, and it says customize your pinned repositories. I see, I'm not making this up. So you can kind of control what's going to float to the top and what's going to kind of sink to the bottom. Does anybody know, is there a way to make your repositories not visible by the public until you're ready for them to be visible?
Well, you can make a private repository.
And then can you change that to be a public repository later?
Yeah, but you have to pay for it.
You have to pay for it?
Yeah.
Okay. Then yeah, then that my best recommendation would be is to label things with in progress. Maybe you make a README that says in progress, like whatever that is. If it's something that you're like, I just don't really want people to see it, like, okay, then mark it as this is, you know, in progress. And developers get that. Like, this is a little bit of a tangent, but the imposter syndrome doesn't go away just because you get your first or second job. The imposter syndrome sticks with people, and they get worried about whether or not their code is good enough, and they get worried about whether or not they're contributing fast enough or the right kinds of things to their teams. And so I think people get that. They get like some things in process, or they're experimenting, right? Like that idea of fail fast. Can you fail fast and iterate on what you're building? I think that that's a totally acceptable thing. And so, you know, as always, keep it professional, keep it clean. You know, don't build something on there that you literally be embarrassed for somebody to see. But in progress code is 100%, 100% okay, and it's part of the process. And they might even get a kick out of that. We had an interview this year where God, I dig this hiring manager so much. He actually asked the candidate, knowing that there was no way on earth that she had ever built anything similar to what they were building as their product. He actually said, like, can we open up your GitHub on her technical interview, her onsite? They opened it up. He said, tell me about a project that you're working on right now. Tell me about a place where you got stuck. And they actually sat there and worked their way through her code on her project as a part of the interview. And for him, and this is part of the reason I think this hiring manager is so cool, is that for him, he was like, well, this is what it's actually going to look like in the day-to-day job, is us sitting down and saying, like, the goal was X, Y, Z. Where are you at? What's getting in your way? How can we work together to get you over that hurdle, right? He's like, so why am I going to ask her about something that she doesn't know anything about? Let me ask her about something she knows about, because I trust that when she's on my team, she's going to know about the stuff we're working on. So I don't expect that most interviews are like that. I think that that is a hiring manager who's incredibly dedicated to professional development of new talent. It is a philosophy that's out there, and I guess I'm offering that as a concrete example of one way that we know hiring managers do think that way. I don't know who had just asked that question. I don't think I caught your name. We've lost them. I hope I answered the question and didn't just go off on my tangent about that hiring manager that I think is the cat's meow. Okay. Let's see. We're at 6:54 and my watch didn't tell me to stand. So before we move on to talking about education section, I'm going to go ahead and pop out of this, and I'm going to mute my mic and give everybody, let's just say, like a 3-minute break. We'll come back together at 6:57. Stretch your legs, grab some water, grab a granola bar, whatever you need, and we'll come back together shortly, okay? Okay, hi friends, how we doing? There's a question. Oh, can we recap how to change our usernames? Good, you can hear me. Fabulous. Thank you, Jonathan. And also, I think I figured out how to make it so that I can see your chat box. I'm using a second monitor, so you're going to get a lot of my chin for the next hour, but it is what it is. So recap how to change your usernames. For those of you who came in late, we're using the names that appear in the participants list to take attendance. And so there are two key ways to do this. If you find the participants list and float your mouse over your name, you'll see two blue boxes pop up. One should say more. And when you click on the More button, it should say Rename. You can change your name there. You can also, in the primary Zoom box where you first went in to log in, so like outside of this immediate meeting that we're all participating in, you'll find your name and your little icon there, and there's a drop-down menu that you can utilize to change your settings. That says My Profile. Oh, and somebody found an even faster route. Oh my gosh, y'all are fabulous. Alt F2, find your name, click that. It's at the upper right, then click rename. Fabulous. Thanks, Laura.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I'm going into game development, and this is based on the GitHub repositories.
Yeah.
I'm doing mostly the code first, and then I'll begin to all the levels and such. I'll be done with all the code long before the game is actually done.
Okay.
But when I upload that to GitHub, I still mark it as in progress, even though all the code is done.
What's going to make you feel the most confident about people looking at that? What's going to make you feel good?
I'm mostly going in for the coding part, so that would make me feel the best.
So yeah, I'd say present that the way that you feel the best about it.
Okay.
Partly because I don't hear a wrong answer in there. I don't think either one of those approaches would be terrible, but it really is just kind of what makes you feel good. If somebody asks you about that, you sound like you'd very confidently be able to say to them, like, yeah, so I built all the code and I'm really excited about that, and then I'm going to do this, and this is where it's going, and it's you sound like you'd be really comfortable talking about that, versus somebody else in their personal circumstance might be like, well, like, I'm not sure how to talk about this, but my goal is really that it's not done, and it's gonna be like, if you think there's any portion of you that is going to sound apologetic about something, let's talk about how to make it so that you're presenting it in a way that you can talk about it and not sound apologetic. I don't know if anybody watches food shows. I watch food shows. It's part of how I relax and just like check out. And there is one on Netflix right now. It's out of Australia. It's called Zumbo's Just Desserts. It's super bizarre, y'all, but I enjoy it. And it's really great to just like decompress at the end of the day. But they just lost this one participant, and what they've been following her about, and she's actually a pretty good chef. She's made it pretty far. But part of what they've been following is her inner monologue, because she's got this mic like I do right now, right? She's got this mic on her all the time. And the way this gal talks to herself is just, oh my gosh. One night I was like, oh, I feel like I have anxiety for you. Like, my anxiety's turned on listening to you mutter all these horrible things to yourself about get it together and you're not very good at this, and all of that. And if you go into any circumstance with that sort of constant dribble in your head, it's going to take you down a notch, and that's what's going to come through on an interview. So whatever we need to do to help you present your progress and your projects in a way that makes you feel confident, like you can look somebody in the eye, and yeah, you're going to be nervous, but like talk about it with passion and curiosity and a dose of confidence. Like, let's see what we can do. Now, I have also had candidates who go into an interview and the employer felt like they weren't interested in the company. They didn't feel like they had anything to learn. Like, I got this all on lockdown. So you might get feedback from us at LaunchCode that also says, like, how can we help you take it down a notch so that you sound like you're someone who's able to get feedback? Are you able to get feedback? Somebody who's able to learn, somebody who's able to adapt in different environments. Like, you might get feedback from those of us on the LaunchCode team in that regard too. But if you're going into a situation and the thoughts in your head are negative ones, holler at us and let's talk through how you can present them in a way that feels good. So who was that just asked the question about game design?
Robert D. Ford.
Awesome. Hi, Robert. Thank you for asking that. That's awesome.
Okay.
I have a question about repos. This is Rex.
Hi.
Hi. What about things like CodePen, or if you have multiple repos or multiple like repository services like GitLab and Bitbucket? Like, should we list things like those as well with the repos, or just pick one that's good?
You can list multiple. It's easiest for an employer if you're going to send them to one place. But like I was saying earlier on that one slide, like if you have something that's hosted on the web and you want to include that, and then you've got something in GitHub, and then you've got something someplace else, like that's what it needs to be. That's what it needs to be. But if you can pick one of those and say like, this is where I'm putting my employer-facing projects, that's a good thing to do. It makes it easier for them. I also don't think any hiring manager is going to be like, ugh, I cannot hire this person. They use multiple platforms for this stuff. I will not interview them. You're not going to turn anybody off that bad. Just make sure it's really easy for them to navigate and to be able to see the parts of your code and the parts of your professional experience that they want to see.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions on the first half of our time together today before I move forward with the rest of our content? Cool. Sharing my screen. Okay.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yes, I'm going to be a little distracted while I figure out how to make this do what I want it to do on my monitor, but go right ahead.
It's about one of the previous sections, technical skills. I know I missed part of that. But what I wanted to ask is, should you only list a skill if you are proficient in it, or even if you're like a beginner?
So you said did you come in late, Jim?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, so what we were talking about before was listing things that you're confident and comfortable talking about. So if it's something that you've studied for like an afternoon, I wouldn't recommend that because you're probably not going to be able to answer very technical questions. Or maybe it was one class that you took a few years ago and you really just don't feel like you can remember anything about it. Hopefully what you've done is that as you've picked those things up along the way, you've learned to incorporate them into other projects and other pieces of your experience, right? But I would list it, I mean, even the word proficiency, like what is proficiency? Are you proficient at the beginner level? Are you proficient at the expert level? Like, you know, how can if you're studying .NET, how can you compare to somebody who's been doing .NET for 15 years? Like you can't. So you have to go with, again, that space of like, when can I talk about this eloquently? And know that that's part of the matching process that employers are doing. They're looking to find the people who are at the level that they're looking for. And so your honesty and your confidence will actually help you communicate where you're at, as opposed to kind of sidestepping around it.
So just taking a class really isn't enough of a skill, you know, to be able to really talk about that technology, as opposed to building a project, incorporating that technology in it.
I think it depends on the class. I think it depends on what you built in that class. I mean, I guess I would hope that most classes will make you practice, right? And so if it's a Monday, Tuesday class, yeah, they probably didn't have a ton of time for you to work on projects and things like that. But yeah. So if you've got specific things, and talk it out with us as LaunchCode coaches. Let us know, and we can kind of talk about it and ask you some questions and see if it should be listed. But don't list anything that if you got asked in an interview, you might stumble.
Okay, sounds good.
Cool. And quick check, everybody can see the PowerPoint right now, yes?
Yes.
Cool, thank you. Yep. I'm going to figure out a way to make this so that the chat feature shows up on my laptop while the PowerPoint is on my monitor, but we'll save that for another day. Great, so education. You do want to include formal and continuing education as much as you can as it pertains to your technical skills. If you have degrees from elsewhere, I do encourage you to include those. A lot of employers value those degrees, associates, bachelors, things that were in progress. A lot of folks do value those experiences and want to see about them. So I would include them. Listing chronological order from newest to oldest. So start with the thing that you did most recently, because it's probably the thing that's most in your head. So that's important. Unless you are a recent college grad, so less than 3 years, we probably wouldn't bother listing the year. Again, if there's something about your work experience or like your family life or things like that that you want to be able to tell a clear narrative, let's talk about that, because there could be a good reason to. And I would list your honors. Probably don't list your GPA. If you had a really great GPA, you probably got some sort of honors in whatever program it was. You may also have other interesting data points. We had a candidate last year in the LC 101 class that it turned out he was like the head of a competitive, he was like a history major, but he was a head of a competitive, was it a robotics club? Something like that. And it was like, yeah, include that. Like totally, like that's relevant experience to show that you have a technical history, even though maybe your degree or the degree that you started when you were 18 years old, like maybe that wasn't as relevant to technology. So if you can include those, do name those. Again, don't overtake the real estate with all those nitty-gritty details. Do what you can with the space that you have. So here's a couple examples of ways that we would recommend listing. And hopefully you can see how this tells a little bit more about that person's experience rather than the first example. Like the first example is clean. It doesn't take up a lot of real estate. I know what it is. But then the better version is like, hey, look at all these other things I've done. Here's why you care about it. I promise you hiring managers are not keeping track of what schools are teaching what. So it's your job as the candidate to tell them what you learned. And again, don't list everything out. List out the stuff that is most relevant. I think that's a key piece here. Yeah, I like this example because it kind of just fleshes it out a little bit more and without being exhaustive or taking up a ton of space. Questions on education?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah?
So the college that I'm currently going to, almost every single class is team-based. How would I write that out?
I'm sorry, is team-based, like you're working in groups?
Yes.
Are you saying that you want to be able to emphasize the fact that there was a lot of group work? Is that kind of the goal of that question?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, I would probably have another line in there that says something about group project focused degree. Like I would add a short bullet that says that was an experience or a feature. I guess it's a feature, and you want to list it very succinctly and very quickly as a feature that highlights that. Or it may be that maybe one of those projects is one of them that you're pulling out, and you can kind of do a double highlight back and forth between those two. I think it's worth mentioning, though.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other quick questions on education? Cool. Work experience. Without even looking at the slides, I am going to tell you, look for transferable skills. And this is something, even when I was working in the Career Center at a university 15 years ago, working with folks across all different genres of job searching and different majors and different professions they wanted to go into and all sorts of things. Look for the transferable skills. Look for the things that you've done before that will move you ahead in your next work environment. Why is it going to make you a better candidate than somebody else? And you might be surprised at the places where you start to see project management, team cohesion, communication skills. We were doing practice interview stuff last year in LC 101, our other class, and somebody started telling a story about they were in maybe like more of a they were in a totally different role. It wasn't a technical role, but they told this story about how they came up with this rather technical solution for the type of position they were in. And they're like, yeah, but that's just Excel spreadsheets. And, it wasn't really that technically impressive, but it was like, yeah, but you were the most technical person in the room. So if you have the opportunity to tell a story about when you've been the most technical person in a room, in another work environment, do it. Make that work for you. The other thing I will say about transferable skills is that anytime you can use the language, the tech language, to describe who you're working with, so you need to describe what you did before, that can be really important. And that can be very succinctly done in terms of like, you could say I evaluated, right? That's a way to describe something. But honestly, in tech, we're going to say we analyzed. Like for whatever reason, that's the word we use. When I moved from working in higher education to working in tech, I changed everything that said student to either customer or client or candidate, right? It's just a small language change, but it demonstrates that you're thinking about things in the tone of the people that you want to hire you, and that you're already progressively thinking about how you will be in that new environment and who you will be serving. So I'd encourage you to do that. Some of the other examples that Lisa came up with in this slideshow is project deadlines, team leading, effective communication. Somebody brought this up earlier, that if you have stuff that you can measure with a number, do it. One of the metrics I have on my resume is that within the first 6 months, so I worked at a technical, like a staffing agency, and what I said was that in the first 6 months, I was in the 60th percentile of recruiters nationally. Right? Like you don't really know what that means. You just know that it means that in 6 months, I was doing better than half of the company was nationally. That's all it is. You don't have to explain the rest of it and get into all the nitty-gritty details, but it demonstrates that I was successful in that environment. So you may have ways to do that. So anything that you can do to measure that and to communicate it in a clear and concrete way is great. Remember to focus on the results you achieved and how you achieved them. When I worked at the software company on the recruiting team and conducted behavioral interviews there, and then we did the follow-up meetings with the entire interview team, it would come up pretty frequently. There's where somebody would say like, yeah, but did that person do that, or did their team do that? I never heard them say like what they did that contributed to that success. And sometimes it was like somebody was trying to come in with so much humility. We accomplished this, and we did, and that love for your team members and that wanting to respect what your department accomplished. But somewhere in there, you actually have to name like what role you took in it, and don't sound like you did it all and nobody else existed, but really be able to name your contributions. And that will come up in your reflections from your group projects that you do here at LaunchCode too, is being able to say like, I worked on the segment of the project that accomplished ABC. The entire project was accomplishing XYZ, but here's the part that I worked on most. You're going to want to be able to tell those stories. And so as you're looking at your previous work experiences, make sure that you're incorporating that as well. You do not have to, how do I say this? Like, you don't have to talk about every job equally on your resume. Again, you're going to use that real estate in a very smart and savvy manner, right? So you're going to spend the most time talking about the jobs that are the most relevant to the one that you want. Which means like if you have, let's say you have client management experience from a previous job and now you're applying to be a software developer, yeah, you're going to give a little bit of space to your client management experience. If you're now applying for a technical account manager position, you're going to talk a lot about how you manage customers and accounts. And you're going to make sure that there's a very clear jump from how what you learned in that role is going to transfer to your new technical role. So do your best to balance that. Again, it's not about the laundry list. I think maybe this is a great example. So right here, we're assuming that this fictitious person is applying for web developer jobs. Here's an example where they kind of used a couple of lines to describe their web developer job. If they were going for a technical instructional designer, I might encourage them to play up the amount of real estate that the math tutor position uses, because it talks about their curriculum design, it talks about their ability to facilitate, it talks about their ability to think about learning outcomes, like whatever they did there. If I was coaching you in a resume workshop, or a resume coaching session, that's what I'd start asking questions about, is like, is there anything from that math tutor experience that might help you land that technical instructor job? So when you think about different types of roles, think about your work history in relationship to that. Questions on the work experience section? We're at about 7:20.
much a question. This is Isaac. It's not so much a question, more just a comment.
I'm going to be really honest that whoever is talking, I can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That's better, yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. It's more of a comment than a question. I was just going to say that sometimes it seems like listing too many jobs can be a bad thing, because if they're too frequent, too many jobs, it can look like you're not reliable.
Yes, that is true. And so let's talk about how you're presenting that with the too many jobs piece, because if you start to pull too many things out, you also people can start to be concerned about the gaps in your work history without explanation. There is also something called a skills-focused resume, which is not what we're talking about today. But if that's something that is applicable to you as an individual, let's talk about whether or not that would be a better approach. And that's something where you highlight you kind of reorganize it so that what's featured first looks a little bit differently. Is that something that feels like it resonates for you, Isaac? I think that was
yeah, I was just commenting more about like having too many jobs. Like if you have you want to list everything you've done or whatever, sometimes you list too many too frequently. It can look like you do a job for a month and then leave, do another job for a month and leave, like you're unreliable in that aspect. Not necessarily gaps in employment, but like, do you understand?
Yeah. And what I was saying is that if you take too many of those out, you'll start to look like you have gaps in your employment. So let's work on your resume together and see, like, if that's you or that's somebody else, let's dig into it and see what we can do to present that material in the most digestible way that still puts your best foot forward and is honest.
So would you recommend listing things the way it is in this example where they have freelance web developer and they have details about that, but then barista, which is apparently not relevant, they just put like one line?
Yeah, I would. And even in my personal resume, I should say even, in my personal resume, I've done something similar to this. And I have some jobs from very early in my professional experience that I do find to be still extremely relevant. And what I've had to do is I've had to shrink those down to be just like one bullet point versus my more recent experience will have like 6 bullet points, right? So you kind of have to play with it a little bit. Like that example I was offering about if this was a technical instructor position, we'd have to figure out a way to make it look like not weird that barista had no bullet points and math tutor had some bullet points and freelance web design, it'd be like this weird bullet sandwich, right? So we need to kind of figure out how to make that work and how to customize that for that individual and for that particular experience. But it can be done. And cover letters are great for assisting with that. The cover letters don't always get read, so I don't like to rely on them too heavily. But cover letters can be a good way to call something out, like, of particular relevance to this position is my experience as a math tutor, which is lower in my chronological history, but I think is very, very relevant to the position we're talking about today, right? So you can kind of play with that a little bit.
Yeah, how about the length of the resume? What's a good length for somebody who's kind of coming in at the entry level, and like how far should you go in terms of the age of your past jobs? I mean, if say like I, for instance, have been kind of trying to keep it to a page. Yep. and I've limited my different jobs to like maybe 4, maybe 3 or 4, depending on what I'm customizing it for. And so it really ends up being a very recent, very, very short resume. Can you talk to like pluses or minuses to that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that the approach that you just described is what I generally recommend. I think that's generally a good approach. 1 page, put as many of those brief, like the barista and the math tutor experiences on there as you can. But no, this doesn't need to go back to 15 years ago. It doesn't have to have your first job listed on it. So that's okay. And so you do get to pick and choose, and you do get to adjust for it. I feel like I got distracted and lost part of your question. So I do recommend that. Oh, you were talking about like how far back and how many pages. 1 page is really the goal if you are brand new to technology. That's always going to be my goal, is to get you on 1 page. I think that there are arguments there are circumstances that warrant a 2nd page. but let's try for that first page. Like, let's try to just make it one page if at all possible, and then we can spill over as needed. And maybe that second page just is like, you know, the section that says prior work history. And then it's just all the other stuff that you did because you feel like it's important to include. We can do that. I did get my chat up, and it looks like somebody's asking a question. The web dev job was a long time ago. It doesn't go back any further. You might figure out a way to incorporate that into your resume. Honestly, what I would want to do as a coach is I would want to sit there and look at what are the experiences in between. Does that contribute to a narrative of you being a tenacious, persistent employee, or does it detract from that? And that's probably the conversation I would have with you, is to look at it and see how does it contribute to the narrative, and is there a slick way to slide that in there with your other work experience. So like, I know a lot of folks who come through LaunchCode, we've got a lot of people who took time off for either elder care or family emergencies or child rearing, whatever that might be. And so sometimes that's actually a very compelling narrative. Like, hey, I had this job 10 years ago. I took 7 years off to raise my kids. Then for the last 3 years, I've been doing something else. It's a really common thing that people do in United States society. So like, let's work on making sure that that's clear and like I said, tells a compelling story. But I think that was Marianne who asked that question. I think you're on the right track. If it's really bumming you out, like I really want people to know that I have worked in industry for 15 years and that I'm not, you know, whatever story that tells about you that makes you feel confident and good, like let's talk about that and see if there's another way to tell that narrative in another manner. There's also the opportunity to list a little asterisk that says prior work history available upon request, right? Like it just says like, look, I didn't just start working last year. I have other experiences, but I'm just not listing them here on the resume. So we can play with that a little bit.
I have one question about work experience. So I've had the same job since I graduated from high school, and I've been at the same location for 14 years. And so I only have one job to put on my work history.
Okay.
Is that going to work against me at all, or?
Is it technical and relevant in nature, or is it a big career jump for you?
It's my current job is not at all related to tech.
I apologize,
retail.
Logan. I've looked at your resume before. I just can't remember. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I started out in retail. I actually switched to a slightly different job at the same company. I started out as a sales floor associate, and then I went to loss prevention. Neither one is tech related.
Yeah.
So
I think that especially in any circumstance that anything even begins to look or smell like a promotion, I would break it down. When you have a limited work history, one way to make it look longer is to break your career history there into multiple chunks. If you have too much content for your one-page resume, then you probably end up consolidating it. But in your circumstance, I would break those into two and say, like, for these years I did this, and for these years I did this, especially because they have very different transferable or relatable skills, right? Those job descriptions are going to be very different. So play with that a little bit and experience that. And I do agree that when you're in non-technical roles, I don't know. Like, I think that employers generally like to think that somebody's going to stick around for a while. And I think that they see that as applicable. But then I was also told, after I had worked at the same university for 10 years, I was told that, like I was having a hard time and that some people didn't want to hire me because I could only speak to one university's set of policies and practices, and that I wasn't varied enough in my experience. So it can go either way. And so I think just be honest about it and play it up the best way possible, because I think some folks will see it differently. I think that employers in the tech space are more excited about your passion for their technology or their client base, and they see that as increasing the likelihood that you will stick around at their company, because you will be interested every day, as opposed to somebody who's just there to pull a paycheck. Yeah. Cool. All right, we're at 7:30. Was that another question?
Yes, Carrie, it's me, Jim. What should you do, though, if you have periods where you're basically searching for a tech job? So maybe you go 3 months, you land a job, you're with that company for a year, and you get laid off due to circumstances, and then you're back into another period of, say, 4 to 5 months where you're searching for jobs. How do you address those kind of periods of unemployment?
If at all possible, those are the places where I'm hoping that you have projects or courses that you completed during that time off of work. And that might be one of those places, like I talked about before, where I might actually recommend including the dates of your project, right? To demonstrate that that's when you were completing those certifications, or, that you were practicing your skills and honing your skills and building them. Yes, you were job searching. Absolutely, you were job searching. But let's play up the side of you that was being a technologist at the same time. So, yeah, and we can get creative and look at your resume. There isn't really a blanket answer for how to address gaps in your work experience. And if they're pretty frequent, then we should get creative about it. If it's only like your most recent, it's hard for me to give a general answer for that, because it is based so much on the individual circumstance. When I used to do the behavioral interviews, when I was a traditional recruiter, we would go through people's work history, and we would ask them. And I would sit down and I'd say, you know what, we're going to go through your last 3 to 4 job experiences, starting at kind of the oldest one. We're going to work our way up to the present day. And this style of behavioral interview that not everybody uses, but some companies use, asks you the same 4 questions about each one of those jobs. And what I'm listening for as a recruiter are the patterns in your behavior. What are the things that time and time again, like in every job, did you tell me about? Yeah, Rick, I'm gonna come back around to what Rick just typed in the group chat. So what we would do is we would talk about what they, gosh, now I got to remember all of the questions I used to ask. So it was, what was the goal of your position? What was your greatest accomplishment? And I was listening to see if your greatest accomplishment had anything to do with what the purpose of your position was. I would ask, what would your supervisor tell me was your greatest weakness and your greatest strength? And what I'm wondering is, like, can you consider what your experience is perceived by the people around you? And then I would ask people why they left, and we would listen for the trends. And if you had one job out of the 4 where you're like, I just really wasn't happy, it was just, whatever. But if you had a story for every one of those 4 jobs where you're like, that boss, they were terrible, and you told me that about every one of your 4 jobs, that's a pattern. And I'm like, ooh, this person's gonna probably struggle with their supervisor in most environments, right? Or I'd be listening for things about that they didn't like in other environments, and I'm like, great, that's not true on this team. They're going to do awesome. So they're looking for those patterns and those sorts of behaviors. And I think that that's true if you're talking about the circumstance where you've been at the same company for 10 or 14 years. We're going to break that down and say, like, tell me about your career trajectory at that company in chunks and why you moved around and what that looked like. And also, if you had gaps in your resume, we're going to talk about, like, what did you do during that time, or why did you leave the previous job, or those sorts of things. We're going to have that conversation. Now, what Rick's saying in the chat is that it's a kiss of death, and I don't think it's necessarily a kiss of death. I think that there are people who are very biased against that. I think that that's true. I mean, pretty much anything that we put on our resumes, like, somebody can find a reason to take argument with it if they want to. But I also think that there are employers who are comfortable with those gaps. I think it's critical that you be ready to talk about them and that you be ready to address them, and not in, like, a dismissive, like, oh, it's no big deal kind of way, but in a way that says, like, yeah, I left that company because my contract didn't convert, and here's why I think my contract didn't convert, and the things that I could improve upon for the next job that I have. So being able to talk about that and weave that into kind of who you are as an employee and how you're growing as a human being, I think is really critical. Cool. let's, for the sake of time and keep us moving forward here. Whoops, gotta get to the right screen. How
Yeah,
do I
can I-
make
can I
my
say one
resume
thing?
great? What's that?
Can I say one thing quick about that?
Who is this?
This is Rick.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was doing a phone interview with this guy from India about some mainframe stuff, and he goes, "Well, you haven't done anything since 2008." And I said, "Well, I've done an internship, and I went and got my software engineering degree, so I've been programming the whole time." And he goes, "No, you haven't. You haven't been programming because you haven't been working." And that just went off, right? And that just ended
Yeah.
right there, because that guy was just he had a block in his mind, and he wouldn't accept anything.
Yeah, and probably they shouldn't have interviewed you. If they could tell that that was true about you and they have a huge thing against that, then they probably shouldn't have interviewed you. And that surprises me. And even as a recruiter, I used to say that to hiring managers, like, why did you bring them in if you were so worried about what was on their resume? You shouldn't have brought them in for an afternoon. So yeah, for better or for worse, that is a thing that exists. And Rick, you and I can kind of talk about, like, how do you handle situations? Like, we can continue to break that down and see what we can do to support you in having those conversations too. Cool. So how do I make my resume great? These are just 3 core things that we practice, and I'm going to try and cruise through these, not fast, but with relative efficiency here. So action verbs, algorithm optimization, and formatting. I know, this is real exciting stuff, right? Action verbs. Anything that you can make end in an ED is probably an action verb. Get creative about them. This link here, there's a lot of them from a lot of different career development agencies across the country. Sometimes I like to look at them just to get the juices flowing, right? Because it's too easy to say the same words over and over again on your resume. So use something a little bit more colorful, use something a little bit more interesting to be able to show what you did. And again, pick something that's relevant. Don't sound like you're way off in left field, like just using colorful language to be colorful. But if you can shake it up a little bit and not have every bullet point match the previous one, the better off you're going to be. I did versus I used this versus I developed and maintained an Angular application, right? You also want to look for those extraneous words like on this project. Oh yeah, it was on that project. You're listing this bullet point under the project. So you don't have to say on this project, right? That sort of thing. So do what you can to use that. There is a lot of discussion out there about whether you should use I in your resume, whether or not you should use bullets versus paragraphs. In the tech industry, I highly recommend that your resume uses bullet points. I can go either way on whether or not you say I did this or you just say developed and maintained. But whatever you do that consistently throughout the entire resume, I think is really, really critical to make it matching. Kind of like those periods at the end of the bullet points that I saw earlier tonight. I was like, oh no, kiss of death, don't do that. Instead of kiss of death. Most people don't notice. It's just me. So yeah, whatever you do it consistently and try to use those good action verbs. Provided, promoted, increased, right? Like these are all ways to make those sentences sound stronger. I promoted to the team lead where I managed a team of 5 support agents, right? That says something about your leadership and what your company thought of you or your workplace thought of you. Algorithm optimization. This is one, and I had a long talk with somebody today about this. It's something that I kind of go back and forth on, honestly. So applicant tracking systems is the generic term used for any kind of software that a company is using to collect applications. Some of them are using algorithms to calculate the match between your resume and the job description. And of course, this is a non-human experience, so it doesn't take into account shades of gray all that well. And so it's a thing that happens. My personal experience, and I almost want to go out and just like survey a bunch of my recruiter friends and see what I can find out. My personal experience is that the smaller the company, the less likely they are to have an ATS that's using algorithms. They are very likely to use an ATS to be managing their applications, right? That's just a database of candidates. It's just a way of keeping all your files together that is in Google Docs, right? So They're very likely to be using an ATS. Are they very likely to be paying for the service that gives them algorithms? If they're a small company, they're probably not. The big companies or the large staffing agencies, they probably are. And then it comes down to the particular position and the particular team who's doing the hiring as to how they utilize that information. So it's not the be all end all, but it is important to think about. And it is commonly used to make a fast screen of who goes into a no pile and who goes into a review more pile. And so when we talk about customizing your resume and your materials for an individual job, this is part of the reason why you want to use some of those the language that they're using in their job description. And it is a psychological trick if it's a human reading it, because they feel more connected because you're speaking to them in the vocabulary that they use, but it also works on a machine. So, oops. Sorry. Why isn't it going forward?
I have a quick question. Are we going to have access to these slides later on?
Yep, these are coming at you tomorrow along with another handout. Ben will send them out by email.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, totally. So if you're looking to optimize your resume for an ATS algorithm, this is where you need to remove a lot of the formatting, which is unfortunate because in a resume to be read by a person, I think it is important to use indents and bullets and things like that to make it easier for them to sort information. But the simpler you can keep it for an ATS, the better off you are. I do recommend that you don't have symbols, you don't have logos, you don't have photos. In fact, if you sent me a resume with a photo for a LaunchCode apprenticeship, I would refuse to submit it until you updated it. So that's how strongly I feel about any kind of images on your resume. You know, we all have artist friends. We have people who are graphic designers. That's a different category. But for technical resumes, take the pictures out. Do use simple fonts, something that is universal. I think that's good for humans as well, but definitely important for the algorithm optimization. Pay attention to what the file requirement is when you're submitting. Hopefully the ATS will stop you and say, nope, you have to submit this as a text file, or nope, you have to submit this as a PDF, like whatever that is. But that's really key if you're doing that. And if you are looking to optimize for the algorithms, you're going to want to use like something like Word or rich text format. And basically it just ends up being really ugly. It's just everything's left aligned and you've got line breaks in between your different jobs, and that's about it. And again, super important to stick to those really standardized skills, education projects, and work experience categories that we talked about earlier, because that is what the ATS is looking for. It is actually trying to parse out those sections into its propagated fields. I'm sure I'm using some verbs wrong there, but it's actually pulling those things out. And so it's kind of funny when an ATS screws up, because you'll get like a job description in their education system, or like you're in the section, or whatever else. So if you're going to make it easy for these folks, for the algorithms, you're going to want to do that. Use the correct keywords. So really look at the job description and use them in your resume. We talked about that earlier. Match as many that are relevant to you as possible. It can help to use multiple spelling methods. I think most of the algorithms will correct for capitalization, but also like if you are putting, when you put technical skills, make sure that your capitalization is correct for how that company or that product is branded. Make sure that your capitalization matches. That's really critical. Yeah, but don't go overboard with listing things over and over and over again. It doesn't, like, there's a point of diminishing returns, right? So, yeah. I'm going to keep going, and then we'll come back for questions on that. Like we said, formatting close to one page as possible, clean and uncluttered. Don't use anything smaller than 11-point font. I know we all get tempted time to time. We get very tempted. Keep your left-right margins at least 0.75. Keep your top-bottom at least 0.5. Use an easy-to-read font, and triple-check all your links to make sure that they are, if they look hyperlinked, make sure they hyperlink. Make sure that they're accurate. Make sure that they go places that are still live, that they're going to take them to something useful. What was my other pet peeve that I wanted to add to this today? Left-right margins, 14-point section headers. Oh, if you have things that are right aligned on your page, use a tab stop. It will make sure that no matter what software the company is using, that everything is still right aligned. If you don't know how to use a tab stop, look it up or ask me. If you are trying to get things to spread out across the page by hitting the space bar 25 times, let's talk. One, I'm going to make your life a lot easier when you edit your resume, and two, it's going to look better every time you send it someplace. So that's my other tip. So that's the formatting section. What questions do you have on that?
All right, so I have a question about formatting.
Okay.
So you said to use a standard font like Arial or Calibri.
Mm-hmm.
What about if you do that though, then your font, gets put in the same pile as everybody and it doesn't really stand out?
I think part of it is that you want to stand out for the right reasons. So one time many years ago, what would it have been? It would have been like 2003. I was on a job interview and I looked across and I had done something nifty with just the top portion where it said like my name and my address and my phone number, right? I used some fancy font. I looked across the table and the person holding my resume, I could see my name, big letters across the top. And it was in this like cowboy font, that like font that they use on like wanted posters. For whatever reason, their computer, and like I said, this is like 2003. We didn't all have, PDF makers on, automatically installed on our laptops or whatever. But I was so embarrassed. I was like, that looks ridiculous. Like I was like, oh my gosh. So, you want to stick out for the right reasons. Yeah, I mean, I guess what's your alternative? Like, what are you suggesting would be a good way to stick out by using fonts?
I guess the alternative that I was thinking is, maybe using something like a programming font, like source code sans, or a different kind of font that kind of speaks your technical value as well as your formatting.
Yeah, I mean, if it was clean and easy to read still, maybe. I also think that it's almost like a sense of humor. And some people are going to get the joke and some people are not. And I know it's not a joke per se, but like some folks are going to resonate that and some folks are not. And it is also kind of one of those things where it's like people just expect these to be clean and legible. So, I mean, I think that there are some slightly more stylized fonts that would probably be appropriate and not inappropriate. But even if you do that, like you need to stay away from using too many of them. I've seen those resumes come through where it's like this section's in this and this section's in this. And it's like, well, let's find another way to make it a cohesive piece. And I do endorse a light usage of bold or italicized in the right circumstances. So like that's another way to vary kind of what you're communicating on the page. But yeah, I'd have to see the specific font you were looking at, Jim, but you might have something there that is still pretty neutral and easy to read.
Yeah, and then going along really quickly with the resume, what do you think about resume paper when you're actually giving your resume, say, to a company or employer? Do you think that's a good idea to print on resume paper, or is that kind of outdated now?
I don't think people care as much as they used to. So I think if it makes you feel good, do it. Of course, you're probably using paper resumes when you maybe go to a career fair. You're going to take like 1 or 2 copies with you when you go to an on-site interview. You're going to maybe you take one when you do like a coffee meetup to talk to somebody about their company. You might take a copy. Most folks just prefer to receive those things all digitally. So, if you've got the paper and you've got a printer at home, and it makes you feel confident to walk in with those tucked into your portfolio under your arm, I don't think it's the end of the world. But also if that kind of feels like something that makes you feel awkward, then I would say don't do it.
Okay.
Good question. I remember those days of like just standing in Office Depot being like, what how do I even begin to pick what paper? Being broke, honestly, being broke and being like, oh my gosh, I need to find paper that looks nice and I can't afford any of this stuff. So I hear you. I hear you on that stuff. Other questions? Might be questions that were put in the chat box earlier that I didn't get a chance to see. Yeah.
I've got one question that it's kind of related to resumes, but a little, I guess maybe a little off topic. What is the value of business cards? Should we have them? Should we not bother with them? What is your take on that?
My recommendation is to get you a $7 and $10 box if you can, off of like Vistaprint, or I use Vistaprint. There's a whole bunch of others that you can use too. Keep it as generic as possible. Keep it down to your name and your contact information. Use one, unless you are a graphic designer, use one of their basic templates that they have and just pick something that looks clean. Don't get too cheeky with it. Don't get any icons on there. They'll try to sell you all kinds of stuff. Just keep it clean and neat. And the reason I recommend that is, honestly, I think it makes for an easier exchange when you're at networking events. That's where I'm a big fan of business cards, is networking events. Because you start a conversation at a networking event with somebody and you're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so interested with what this person does or what they told me about their company. This is so great. And then some, host at the front of the room is like, okay, everybody, let's have a seat, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, crap, I didn't get to talk to them. You just bust out that card and you hand it to them and say, hey, I'm really enjoying this conversation. I'd love to pick your brain on my career trajectory sometime. Can I get your contact information? And simultaneously, you are handing them yours. And there's this psychological trick, I promise you, that as I pull my business card out and start handing it to people, I watch their hands start reaching for their pocket. And so I think you're more likely to complete that transaction quickly. I think it also says, like, I am looking to network. I am looking to expand my perspectives on my career. So I think it is a nice polished thing to do. If that $10 off of Vistaprint or whatever feels like I don't have that money right now, then don't bother. It's okay. You don't have to have it. But if you can get some of those printed up, and I think when I did my personal, because I carry 2 sets of business cards. One is LaunchCode, one is like the rest of my life. And when I got those printed up, I really think I got a box of like 350 or 250 for $10. And so those will last you a while because you're not handing them out like candy. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. You might choose to put your GitHub link on there or something. Like if you've got a portfolio that you feel good about, you might leave it on there. I recommend staying away from a job title. Just don't put it on there. It's fine. You don't have to put it on there, because if you put it on there and then later you change your mind, you got to print new cards. It's a waste. So like, just leave it blank. Yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. Gosh, you guys can get me ranting on all kinds of stuff tonight. I'll try to be better rested next week. Let's see. If you go to Vistaprint, you can put your cards in your cart and don't order. They'll send you discount. That's a good point, Isaac. Yeah, Vistaprint likes to send you discount codes once they've got your email address. So yeah, that's cool. Other questions either on the formatting section of this presentation or anything that we've talked about tonight, or that I've talked about tonight?
Hey, I have a question, Carrie.
Yeah.
It's Dana. Hi.
Hi, Dana.
Hi. I wanted to ask about the education portion, and it's kind of a two-sided question. First, I know Lisa has said formal education is important. If you have it, put it on there.
Yeah.
But like, is it okay to put a master's degree that you can spin into like tech related, but not a bachelor's if it's got nothing to do with tech at all? Or would you put both?
I mean, how desperate are you for the space on the page? Like, it seems weird to put a master's degree and not list the bachelor's degree. I think it is okay to list the master's degree, and I don't know, maybe you like highlight what your thesis project was, or you know what I mean? Like you could put a bullet in there that like really like hits home, like this is why my master's degree is super relevant to what I'm applying for. And then maybe you don't have that similar bullet point for your bachelor's degree and you just list it. I mean, people assume that if you have a secondary or a tertiary degree that you have the first one, but at the same time, like, I don't know. I think it would be weird to look at it and be like, why didn't they put that on there? What are they? So I would list both.
Okay, cool. So the second part of my question then is, so I know like LaunchCode is like LC 101 is on my resume. I'm assuming we wouldn't put all in tech on there because it's more like group project related and that might tie into the project side. I know a few of us are also doing like the Google Udacity scholarship thing and like different other training things. So I guess how big of a training program should it be for it to make it onto our resumes?
Again, it goes back to relevancy. I don't think it's about the size of the program. I think it's about relevancy and how you need to, what you need or want to demonstrate in order to get the job that you want. So I do think Liftoff, I've been telling employers that Liftoff is like a talent incubator. That's one of my little catchphrases that I use. I talk to people about it as being a professional development series. I talk about it being a development community. So you can kind of play with that language to have it fit in. And I think there is something interesting about, especially if you're not working and you've got that gap to say like, yeah, I was in this program and this program and this program. I was coding all the time. I was coding just about as much as a full-time developer. Like, I don't know if you are, but like, if you are, like, let them know, right? And anything about certifications, that's a question I'm seeing in the chat box. Certifications, put them down. Put them down. And even if it's like your CompTIA from 6 or 7 years ago, put it down. And I don't mean to dismiss CompTIA. CompTIA is great and is very much a standard in the industry, but it's not as much related to software development, right? So like depending on what you're going for, but put those in. I've had a lot of employers talking lately about AWS certifications. That seems to be a popular question. I don't know if that's just Portland or the people I'm talking to. I don't know, but I think it's coming up. MTA or entry level and not. So Jim's asking a question about like specific types of certifications. I think there's an intersection there of how old they are and how relevant they are. I mean, I think anything that tells you about like Linux or other operating systems as a certification, I think that's a good thing to list. There's a surprising number of companies out there who value certifications in that regard because it can tell you something about how your end user is going to experience the software that you're building. Again, that depends on the role, right? Because if you're applying to be front-end web developer, well, it's less relevant. It demonstrates that you have a technical history and technical prowess. It is less poignant to talking about the specific job. So I think there's like a matrix there that we could go through. And again, it's about the space, the real estate on your page.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. And those of you who chimed in with additional questions.
Yeah, Carrie, so going back to education, I know we've kind of hit home on this a lot. What about Free Code Camp or Code School or Team Treehouse? Do you actually recommend listing those education programs on a resume, or is there kind of a limit to how much of that free training you should put on a resume?
I'm going to offer up that a lot of people don't know that stuff's free. Honestly, I think a lot of folks don't know. So I think there probably is a limit of how many things you can list before your resume looks out of balance.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like if you're doing stuff and you're learning things, again, can you speak to it? Did you do enough of the treehouse experience that you can say like, yeah, this is what I learned, or this is what I practiced there, or this is how that experience is helping me to be a better contributor in the job that you're interviewing me for. So, make it relevant, make it valuable. You don't just want it to be a collection. Like, I'm thinking about, so like my stepdaughter, she's almost 13 now, but when she was younger, she would like have this pile of things and she'd be so excited to show you like the pile of things. And you were like, I don't know why we're excited about this pile of things. Like, and I'm a good bonus mom. So I'm going to say like, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more. Like, I'm going to say that, but I'm looking at it and it just looks like a pile of things. But then every once in a while she'd be like, and then, you know, I was at the creek with my sister and we found this rock. And I'm like, oh, like that triggers a happy memory for you. So like, if you can get around to a why that thing is valuable, then it's valuable. And if you can't, then it's hard to sell it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure thing. Patrick's on chat asking a very specific question about CompTIA and expirations on certifications, that sort of thing. Again, let's look at the individual circumstance and talk about whether or not it needs to be on there. They do expire after a while. Depending on how you're trying to present yourself as a candidate, like somebody might be interested in knowing that you did it and that you had that knowledge somewhere along the line. And in other circumstances, it's not worth the space it's taking on the page. So that would be a very nuanced sort of question. Other things that I can address for folks today. Jim is asking a question about temp agencies. I'm going to put that on hold here because I feel like that's a very specific question, unless I get a whole bunch of like +1s in the chat that everybody's like, let's talk about that. Because we're approaching 2 hours. And so what I want to do is see if there's any other questions for the general good, and then kind of then I can hang out. I'm happy to hang out and chat for a little while about other certain things. So
one last one. Okay.
Yeah, we got it, and we got another one in the list too. What's your question, Rick?
All right. A copy of my resume from a template off of somewhere else, found on the internet somewhere. And in addition to like languages and tools and blah, 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 there was like a skills section, and it said things like software development, user training and support, GUI design, coding and scripting, testing and documentation. So it kind of says some things, you know, debugging and troubleshooting. So it kind of says some things other than just the languages. It's like how you're using the languages. But it's kind of cool, but it's also a space eater. And I guess you would kind of assume that anyone who works in IT already does all this stuff anyway. What's your thought?
I would say play up the things that you need to play up for that job. And if there's not things to play up for the job, then delete it. So like I put some candidates in for a QA role this week, and the hiring manager came back and was like, well, they just look like developers. And I was like, you know what, like developers make good testers, and these folks want to be. So, you know, I think that like if you're applying for something, there is this burden of proof on you that you need to describe the testing methodologies that you've learned, or like you need to highlight that someplace. And if nothing else, it tells them that like you've spent some time thinking about that, and that you understand that that's a core competency for the job that you're going to have on the QA team, right? So I think that that's really critical. But overall, yeah, I kind of tend to agree. Like it's kind of redundant. I'm also, and not every recruiter will tell you this, but I'm also kind of thumbs down on the objective sections that say like, I'm looking for a job as a blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, you're applying for the job that you just applied for. Like, kind of feels like a waste of space. But some of those can be, sometimes the objective can be really useful. Like, I have been a sales account manager, and I'm really excited to gain enough technical experience to work in a technical sales role, right? So like highlighting this transition that you're trying to make. I think that could be valuable. But yeah, if it feels like it will really tie your experience to the particular role, use it. If it doesn't, don't. That's my opinion.
Jim just asked a question in chat.
Yes, and I see one from Josh too. Let me move my window here. Soft skills, I don't, you know, again, they can be really redundant. Like, tell me a story. Tell me something that's relevant. The soft skills portion of a resume can be really helpful if you're doing that, if you're worried about the algorithms catching you. And so if they talk a lot about communication and collaboration, like you need to say communication and collaboration someplace in your resume. Now, hopefully you've just got job experience where you can include that and you can address the soft skills through the other places that you've done it. Because really, I don't want you just tell me you're a good communicator. I want you to show me where you've been a good communicator. So that's preferred. But if you're in a pinch, then yeah, you could include those. Let me scroll back before I lose Josh's question here. Senior developer talked about the terms internship and co-op in context of experience. Maybe that's an industry term for something else, but it seems like an applicable descriptor for Liftoff. I would not call Liftoff an internship because you are not reporting to any sort of employer. So I would stay away from describing this experience that way. I haven't heard the word co-op, so I'm not really, I mean, I've heard the word, but I haven't heard it in this context. So maybe that might be something. I mean, this is a really unique program, so it's, you know, yeah, maybe keep testing it out on some of your informational interviews and let me know what resonates with people. So I tend to call this a program. I tend to call it an educational program. I'll call it, like I said, an incubator, more like a finishing school. Like people have a core set of skills, but they're looking to get into the marketplace. So we're trying to support their growth in whatever areas need to grow. And that's going to vary from person to person. So we do that. Yeah, so technical initiative. See, the thing about tech initiative is like, that's what I do for a living. That's not what you do for a living. We want to put the language in a way that talks about what it does in your life as opposed to what it does in my life. So yeah, we're an initiative, but really, what does that mean for you? So can we use any CSS frameworks or libraries when developing our portfolio websites, or all of the code should be our own? I think that's fine. I think if that's a real world use, some of you may also choose to get involved with open source projects, which is great. So I don't think absolutely everything has to be your own. I think it's about your ability to demonstrate utilizing the tools that you have. And I do think that developers use those libraries and those databases all the time. So yeah, I think that's totally fair. Cool. Maybe 2 more questions for the good of the order. And then once we hop off, we can talk a little bit about staffing agencies and that sort of thing. Awesome. Well, we are at just over 2 hours, so I want to thank you all for your tenacity. I think that sometimes sitting in front of your computer for this long listening can be maybe even more trying than doing it live in a session. So Portland folks, y'all are in it to win it these first few weeks. I promise we're going to get face-to-face on a Tuesday night. It's going to happen in a couple weeks. We just had some technical challenges reserving spaces this week. So we're doing this one all webinar. Next week, we'll be back in Seattle. I don't know which building, so check your Canvas thing. But Portlanders will be online again for the webinar next week. Should be really great. David's locking down and confirming who the presenters will be, but it'll be guest speakers again. So I'm stoked about that. Yeah, and we look forward to seeing the revisions on your resumes. I know some folks you probably sat here today and you're like, okay, yeah, I got that. I could tweak this little thing over here. And I'm sure there's some people walking away today going like, ooh, I got some work to do. But that's what we're here for. And we want to support you in that. And we want to help you be as successful as possible. So with that, I'll let the bulk of folks head off for the evening. I'll sit here and talk about staffing agencies and other questions for a few minutes too. So, oh, there's a question. Should you send your resume? So you're going to actually send your resume right now to Ben Shutt, ben@launchcode.org. Lisa is on some medical leave for a couple of weeks. She's doing awesome. I texted with her last night, but she is at home resting for a little bit. So she'll be back in action soon enough. So in the meantime, send them to Ben. If you're in a pinch and he's behind, because there are almost 80 of you and one of him, you can use me and David, but Ben's going to be in like that routine of reviewing things and getting back to them. So cool. All right, so I see a question about LinkedIn, but I'm going to circle back around to the question about staffing agencies. If I can find it. I think the question was like, just what are my thoughts on it, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I can't find it. So I thought it was at like 7:58. General thought. What is your general thought on going through temp agencies or contractors to find positions? So I did work for a staffing agency. That was my first job when I left my career in higher education to move into tech. So I worked at a staffing agency. There's a lot of good and there's a lot of really great staffing agencies out there. There's a lot of incredibly good-hearted people doing incredible work. There's a lot of very viable jobs that come through staffing agencies. They can be trickier because you don't always have benefits. And so therefore your bill rate needs to look a little bit different because you're going to have to pay for your own health insurance and things like that. In some cases, you know, the company goes to the staffing agency and says like, we want this person to be contract to hire. And then once you're on site, then they decide that it's not, they don't have the budget. And so it's not going to be a to hire. It's just a contract position, right? So there's changes that happen throughout those positions. It's not as solid as a direct hire by a company. That said, maybe I should take a step back and describe what a staffing agency is. So staffing agency is a firm that their entire business is finding out about jobs that employers have, and charging that employer to go out and find the needed talent for that position. And sometimes those folks are working on an existing pool of candidates that they already know and they already have like their network. Sometimes those folks are sitting down and they're calling like mad and they're going through profiles on Monster and they're looking through candidates that have worked for them before nationally, and they're calling them and saying like, hey, I've got this job. Are you looking right now? So it really varies from circumstance to circumstance. One thing to know is that the staffing agency is trying, like that's how they make money, is by making that placement. And so they are going to fight tooth and nail to get you that job because they don't get paid if you don't work out. So they're going to fight tooth and nail. And when they try to talk to you about your resume, like they mean it. And it's okay to ask that recruiter, like, so do you think my resume needs to be changed that way entirely? Or are you just saying that like for this job, you would like me to change my resume that way? The other thing to know about staffing agencies is that they're going to try and protect the relationship with the company. That's going to be a big portion of that job. And so they're not going to put people forward that they're not confident the hiring manager is going to be interested in because it makes them look bad. They are also typically, in most circumstances, they're going to redact all of your contact information from that resume before they submit it to the employer because they don't want the employer going around their back and hiring you without them in the middle when they're the one who made the introduction, right? So that's, it's a part of their process. So there's a lot of great recruiters out there. Staffing agencies are also a place where a lot of new recruiters cut their teeth, and so they get a bad rap. And I was one of those people. I got a bad rap. You know what I mean? Like I was one of those people at one point who just had to make 125 to 175 phone calls in a week and talk to people and ask them about their career history and sometimes call somebody who had a lot more experience than the job I was hiring for. And they felt offended by that. And I was like, sorry, like I didn't know, I'm learning, you know. So they do get a bad rap. But I think there's a lot of good people out there. Watch your bill rates. Be conscious about that, and especially as it is impacted by health insurance or other sorts of things that you would normally get offered in a full-time permanent direct offer. So one of the challenges when we're talking about resumes tonight, one of the challenges about doing contract work is being able to be clear about when you were intentionally being a contractor versus when you had a number of contracts that didn't convert. So if you've done a whole bunch of contract jobs, I would recommend that you kind of structure your resume in a way that says like, I don't know, like 2013 to 2016, independent contractor, and then list the different places that you worked. So that it says like, this was a decision I made that I was going to be doing contract work. Because if it was a contract to hire position and you didn't get the offer, and that has happened multiple times, that doesn't look good for you. And so again, we're not lying. We're going to put your best foot forward and we're going to say, like, look at all these. I did a whole bunch of contract jobs and I had a lot of great experience. So freelance work, the same sort of thing. The more that that was an intentional decision, and you can list out like, I did this for this client, I did this for this client, I did this for this client. Like the more that you can show that that was an intentional decision, probably the better off you're going to be. That said, there are just people who freelance, and there are just people who are contractors, and so it's not the end of the world. But whatever we can do to try and make that look as poised and polished as possible, I think is really great. What dollar amount do you tell a staffing agency for pay? So that's a good question. So I actually used to use desired comp as a way to try and figure out whether or not I was in the right ballpark for the level of job I had. So if the job I had was going to pay $27 an hour, and I got on the phone and somebody told me that they're currently looking for jobs that pay $120,000 a year, I'd be like, okay, I'm not in the right track. I gotta get off this call or find out if I got another job in the office that pays closer to $65 an hour, right? That's the other trick, is that if you take any hourly wage, double it and then add a bunch of zeros, that's what it roughly annualizes to. So $25 an hour is roughly $50,000 a year. What do you ask for? Shoot, I don't know what to tell you. You got to figure that out for yourself. I mean, I get that you just want the job, but you got to sound put together, because also if I'm calling on a $28 an hour job and you tell me that your minimum is $19 an hour, I'm going to go, oh, okay, like maybe this isn't a good match. So also, people should not be asking you how much you make or how much you made. They should be asking you, how much do you want to make? That's a thing. I don't know what to tell you about what to ask for pay. A lot of that is going to come down to what your circumstances are and what your health insurance costs you and that sort of thing. I can't really make a recommendation on that. Using a LinkedIn resume. Okay, so there's a question about what about a LinkedIn resume? Is it unprofessional to just use it? Are you talking about the thing when you go into your LinkedIn profile and you just like download the PDF? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about in the LinkedIn question there.
LinkedIn, you can use it as like a resume. I mean, they give you an option to pretty much fill it out just like a resume that you're putting together with all of your work experience and job history. And you can either download the PDF or you can just use your LinkedIn profile like a resume.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't do that. Partly because it does not give you the opportunity to customize for each application in the same sort of way. And when I was working for the software company, not the staffing agency, I had people say like, I don't have a resume. I'm not going to send you a resume. That hiring manager can look at my LinkedIn. And hiring manager was like, I don't want to deal with that much ego. I don't want to deal with somebody who's going to tell me, no, I'm not going to follow this kind of common practice. So I have not looked at the format when you download it as a PDF in a couple of years, to be honest. But I do think that it keeps you away from being able to customize for each individual role. And you might independently be able to argue with me about that in a one-on-one setting if we pulled it up and took a look at it, but that's my gut reaction. Oh boy, now we're talking about money. Ugh, it's 8:16 at night and we're talking about money. What can I say about salary negotiation? What is the minimum pay I'm willing to accept? That's a question I've gotten. It is a hard game. Well, it's not a game, it's a negotiation, right? And it's figuring out like what's the right match for the roles that you're applying for. And I've gotten some surprises by different employers that I've spoken to this year about roles, about how much more they pay in some circumstances and how much less they pay in some circumstances. And so I think that's a lot of what job seekers are up against, is that different companies have very different ideas. But it is also a way to consider what you think your experience is worth in the marketplace. And so probably what the better research is to do is to look at the types of positions you're applying for and figure out what their typical range is. So for entry-level developer jobs, the ones that we fill sometimes through LaunchCode. I tell employers that for that entry-level position, our candidates are expecting between 50 and 70K. That's a very large window. And that would be in a full-time permanent offer that would include all of your benefits, your healthcare, your PTO, your 401k, all of those sorts of things. I've also had people that I did informational interviews with tell me that within the first 2 years, they went from making 45K to making a lot more than that. And so it really varies across the board, and you have to do your research on that particular position and your particular circumstance. There is no magic number to make that work. And you can do some Glassdoor research, and you can do some informational interviews, that sort of thing, to try and get a ballpark of what to expect. I hate making generalizations like this, but for any technical role, I would stay away from saying anything less than $15 an hour if it's a technical position. Any less than that starts to imply that the role doesn't, like on the employer side, if they're paying less than $15 an hour, it's starting to imply that like it doesn't require any training. And maybe you're okay with that, and in which case that's totally fine if you want to cut your teeth. But for the most part, if it requires some sort of technical training, I would say to expect at least $15 to $20 an hour and not minimum wage. And I know, oh gosh, I'm also saying that in terms of Portland. Seattle, you're like a whole nother ball of wax, and I don't totally understand your minimum wage policies now. So take that with a grain of salt. I just realized I said all of that from the Portland perspective, and Seattle folks, it's a different situation. So, there's a question in here about what to do if you feel like an employer is trying to trip you up and make you feel uncomfortable. If somebody makes make you feel uncomfortable, let's talk about what that looked like and what they were asking. Because let's talk. Yeah, maybe we just need to have like a Monday session where we talk about those experiences that people have had, because there's a few people weighing in on the chat about that. My experience is that typically people are not trying to play a game. I think it's a matter of honing in on what they're trying to get at. So like when I worked at the staffing agency, we had like a bill rate, right? And that's how much we're going to charge the employer for the contractor. And so the profit that the company would make was the difference between what the bill rate to the employer was and what the candidate was willing to accept. And so if we thought we had a really great candidate, and the candidate was saying that they wanted $2 more an hour, we might just eat that $2 and be like, great, we're going to get the job. Our cut is going to be a little bit smaller. It's totally fine. If we had a really great candidate and that candidate was like, I want $5 more an hour, that might actually put us in a category where we have to go back to the employer and say, look, the candidates we're finding, they're awesome, but all of them are asking for $5 more an hour than what you said you're willing to pay. Are you willing to pay $5 more an hour? And it's not true in every circumstance. But so in some of those circumstances, I was asking tough questions about like, okay, so if I can get you $4.25 more, like, would you consider it? Like, would you take it? And that's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But it's also, if you're working with a staffing agency, they're the intermediary between. Those rules about talking about money are totally different when you're working directly with an employer. You typically an HR person will do one ask about what is your asking salary. You can give them a $10,000 to $15,000 range. If you're working directly with the employer. If you're working with a staffing agency, there's a lot more confirming and clearing that up front before they are willing to submit you, because it's their reputation on the line, and they only want to submit candidates that'll be successful. So if you feel like people are doing tricky things, let's talk about it. I feel like usually when people are talking about money, it's because they don't want to waste anybody's time, and money can be a deal breaker in a lot of circumstances. And so they're trying to get that out of the way. So, yeah. Cool. We are at 8:22. We have talked all over the map tonight. I am going to go ahead and cut us off here for the evening. Of course, we will have additional information or additional workshops, and we've got a lot of time together. In the job search strategy group on Monday, we spent some time talking about projects. If we need to talk about salary negotiations on another Monday, like, I'm up for that. And we'll keep moving forward on whatever topics we need to clarify. So yeah, I hope you all have a lovely evening. I'm going to hit the unrecord or the stop record button now before I forget. And yeah, we'll talk to you really soon. Night, y'all.